In this clip, I'm going to introduce Grice's Conversational Maxims and the notion of implicature. Like many truly useful analyses, Grice takes a sharp intellectual stick and pokes around at behavior that is so common and everyday that it hardly seems worth analyzing. I hope you'll enjoy these concepts as much as I do. If you find anything unclear or just want to read further, there are many discussions of these concepts online. Google any of the slides. Philosopher Paul Grice introduces his lecture Logic and Conversation with an imagined conversation like the one above. A and B are talking about C. Now A, I'm going to call him Andy, asks Bill, or B, about Chris's new job at the bank. Bill says he gets along with his colleagues just fine and he hasn't been to prison yet. Now Andy knows that Bill has done more than answer the question. He's implied something. Andy now has the job of figuring out what Bill really means. And we can probably come up with a few ideas of what Bill might mean here. Andy, knowing Chris and knowing Bill, and having a sense of their characters and past interactions, can probably come up with a more accurate idea than we can. Whatever we believe Bill to have meant, it's important to note that he didn't really say it. Bill might have meant that all bankers are thieves and should eventually go to prison, or that Chris is a dishonest character, or something like that, but he didn't say it. He suggested, implied, hinted, connoted, or insinuated it, but he didn't say it. Grice chooses to use the word implicate instead of wrestling with the thesaurus repeatedly during his discussion. This allows him to use the word implicature for any use of language in which something is implied or suggested rather than said, and implicatum for the thing that is implied. I think you'll often see people use implicature both for the use of language to imply something and for the thing that is implied. I don't see implicatum being widely used. Let's look at some example implicatures. The exchanges on this page are uses of language in which something is implied rather than stated. In the first exchange, B does not say, "We can't afford sushi." But B does create an implicature. Something is being implied here because "we have bills due" is not an answer to the question, "Do you want to go for sushi tonight?" It's up to us to decide what it is that's being implied, or up to up to A rather, in this case, to decide what B is implying. B's response, "Do you have an hour or two?" implies something in response to Andy's question because it doesn't answer his question. An implicature has been created. B has used language to imply something rather than stating it. Andy now has the job of deciding what she has implied, or rather figuring out the implicatum. I'm not exactly sure of the pronunciation. In the third example, it's reasonable for A to assume that B is creating an implicature. A will probably believe B to be implying, for example, that Peter is not handsome. This would make Peter is not handsome the implicatum of the implicature. Now, I've just said that it was reasonable for A to assume B was creating an implicature. Why is it reasonable? Why can't we just assume that B thinks it's worth mentioning Peter's lovely personality? It does seem somewhat relevant. You probably agree that something is being implied here because you are an expert conversationalist. However, if word got back to Peter that B thinks he's ugly, and B said, "No, I wasn't implying anything," how do we know that B is creating an implicature? Grice argues that people engaged in a conversation behave cooperatively. And here's a quote from his original lecture. "Our talk exchanges do not normally consist of disconnected remarks, and would not be rational if they did. They are characteristically, to some degree at least, cooperative efforts, and each participant recognizes in them, to some extent, a common purpose or set of purposes, or at least a mutually beneficial accepted direction. So it's necessary that we cooperate to some degree in a conversation for a conversation to work at all. If we didn't cooperate, our interactions would be a series of disconnected remarks." Grice expresses this as the cooperative principle. The cooperative principle is this: Make your conversational contribution such as is required at the stage by which it came, by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. In other words, say what you need to say when you need to say it in a way that can be understood by the person you're talking to. The cooperative principle breaks down into several maxims: the Maxim of Quantity, the Maxim of Quality, the Maxim of Relation, and the Maxim of Manner. And I'm going to discuss each of these in turn. The Maxim of Quantity says that participants in a conversation act under the understanding that they should make their contribution as informative as is required, and that they should not make their contribution more informative than is required. In other words, say what you need to say, but not much more than what you need to say. And we aren't solely talking about the length of responses here. We're talking about having a good sense of what information is necessary at any particular time. Imagine a boy standing outside of a burning house being asked by a fireman, "Is there anybody inside?" If the boy answers, "My mother and father," but he does not mention his aunt and his uncle, then he's not giving enough information. Imagine a boy answering the telephone and the neighbor says, "Hi, Timmy, is your mother home?" And the boy answers, "Yes, and so is my father, my aunt, my uncle, and my sisters." In this case, he's giving more information than is required. Or, same example, and probably much more likely, the neighbor says, "Hi, Timmy, is your mother home?" And Timmy says, "Yes, but she's going pee." Perhaps this is a little more information than is required. On the internet, this is often known as TMI, or too much information. The Maxim of Quality is the general rule of conduct that we should tell the truth. To remember the name of the maxim, think of false information as information that is of bad quality. You can have a great deal of false information or a little false information, so it isn't quantity we're talking about, but quality. This maxim is expressed as: try to make your contribution one that is true, do not say what you believe to be false, and do not say that for which you lack adequate evidence. The Maxim of Relation tells us that our contributions to a conversation should be relevant. If someone asks about the weather tomorrow, we shouldn't answer with a recipe for barbecue sauce. Finally, the Maxim of Manner tells us that our contributions should be expressed in a way that makes it possible for them to be understood. We should avoid obscurity of expression, avoid ambiguity, be brief, and be orderly. I believe this is the one that academics like myself have the most trouble with. I hope that in this presentation I've been cooperative. That is, I hope that I've told you as much as you need to know, but not much more. Been correct in what I've told you. Used examples that were relevant, and put these thoughts together in a clear and coherent fashion. Now, here are 5 references used in this series of presentations. The second one there is the reference to Grice's original lecture, which has been reprinted a number of times. The reference I have there is to a fairly recent reprinting of it, so it should be easily purchasable. Ta-ta for now.